Good day and welcome to the CORY Morgan Show. As you can see, I'm still wandering in the desert. Actually, this is the last of the shows I'll be doing from down here in the south. I'm with mixed feelings starting to make my way back north to get to my regular life up there. The news certainly hasn't stopped while I was gone. Lots going on, good, bad, and some terrible, tragic items going on. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the show. Of course, can't avoid talking about the horrors of what's happened in Tumbler Ridge. And, lots on the independence front and many other things on the go. In a little bit, I'll be talking with political theorist and columnist William Barclay. He wrote a long column with the Western Standard. He's written a number of them with us, of course, and it's on the independence movement. I'd like to get an Eastern perspective on that. William's certainly not heavily opposed to the independence concept, and he's giving his views on what's guys behind it and what's powering it. So let's start with my opening monologue. Something, just we got to keep on this. So along with being incapable of understanding the basic principles of supply and demand, progressives have a blind spot when it comes to race-based policies. I mean, they consider themselves champions of the downtrodden minorities, yet they support the divisive policies that cause minorities to become downtrodden in the first place. They recognize that race-based policies caused injustice and wrongs for centuries, yet they feel the way to reconcile those wrongs is to implement more race-based policies. Look, guys, two wrongs do not make a right. And things move in waves and in cycles. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, those policies were trendy for a couple of decades. The policies finally overshot the target. They went too far, and as they became more extreme, the public finally recognized the absurdity of DEI. The pushback began in the private sector, with things like Robbie Starbuck and others pushing large corporations, and those corporations realized these policies were hurting their bottom line. Now, the outrage of progressives was worth enduring as they stripped away entire DEI departments from their corporate headquarters. But now we're seeing something even better. Public institutions departing from DEI policies. The University of Alberta dumping its DEI policies, and boy, some people are outraged, of course. And it must be, so the U of A must be supported in this. Not only that, this movement should be fostered and spread among all institutions, both private and public. We got to take advantage of the backlash against race-based policies and strip them from government legislation. Rest assured, social justice warriors, they're going to immediately begin lobbying and trying to enshrine new race-based policies as fast as we can get rid of them. If we can go scorched earth now with them, though, it's going to be a slow, insidious creep for them to bring their woke policies back. It could take decades. DEI policies are insulting and detrimental to minorities. The principle of racial equality has been embraced by Western democracies for generations. Having passed the equality hurdle, though, progressives have moved on to the more loosely defined goal of equity. And this is where they assume that even if all rights are equal, some minorities are incapable of succeeding without an extra hand up. That is true racism. And it's ironic how progressives don't understand that they've embraced an ideology no less vile than those of historical segregationists. Slap in the face to people within minorities who earn success through hard work and merit, only to have some people start assuming they only excelled due to the racially preferential hiring and lowered standards in education. In Toronto, a race-based Black-only school was opened in 2009 to the celebration of progressives. Martin Luther King literally fought and died to end racial segregation in areas including education, only to have fools today entrenching segregation under the banner of equity generations later. Separating Black students from everybody else hasn't been a success, considering Black students drop out before graduation at a rate 23% higher than other races in Toronto. It didn't work. But since when a progressive let success or failure stop them from pursuing race-based policies, though, right? The granddaddy of racist policies, of course, is the Indian Act. Even the name of the act indicates how out of date it is in the modern world. The act entrenches all sorts of race-based laws and has done so since 1876. Canada's Indigenous people have been lagging the rest of the country in every single measure of standard of living, and it's getting worse. Crime, poverty, health issues, domestic violence, low education rates, and high suicide rates are a part of every reserve in Canada, and the Indian Act is woven into every part of it. Despite this, progressives fight bitterly against any effort to scrap the act. In fact, they call people critical of the act racists. Yeah, they're really that blind to their own thinking. In BC, the government's actually beginning to enshrine a new set of property rights based on race, even gone as far as to ban people, non-Indigenous people, from public parks. This only increases distrust between cultures and, of course, makes things worse for the already suffering Indigenous population. But again, outcomes don't seem to matter to progressives. They've blinded themselves with bizarre, misplaced ideologies wrapped in virtue signaling and identity politics. There's little sense trying to win over the people immersed in Canada's identity politics. They're beyond reason. We can and must cater to the minority of Canadians who are fatigued with watching race-based policies dividing people while offering no visible benefits to anybody, aside from some bureaucrats and lawyers who profit from that division, that is. Now, educational institutions are the best place to begin, and the University of Alberta, with them moving away from DEI policies, they can lead the way for others to follow. Make it shameful for any institution, whether public or private, to hold any race-based policies. Let's ride the current wave of public distaste for institutionalized racism, real institutionalized racism, and wipe race-based policies from the map once and for all. Beyond shaming these institutions, governments must start defunding the ones that insist on maintaining racist policies. There's no better time than now to do it, and it is time to live in a world with true racial equality. Okay, that's the rant that's got me going. Let's get into our newsroom and check in with Dave. I know he is very, very busy today. Lots going on, and see what's happening there. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Hey, good, Corey. I'm expecting to see tumbleweed going behind you.
Yeah, well, I think there'd be plenty if the wind was blowing today. This has been a brilliantly calm day and not blazingly sunny for a change. So good for shooting live video.
Nice. Seen any snakes?
No, I keep looking. I want to bring you one back for a pet, but I've had no luck. I do a lot of walking. No snakes yet.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, extremely busy. Dominated by Tumbler Ridge, the horrible shooting that last night done by a 18-year-old trans person by the name of Jesse Strang. Right now, we're leading off with a 12-year-old girl that is fighting for her life in the Vancouver hospital. She was shot in the head, and the families put out a statement and go fund me. Our publisher, Derek Fildebrandt, went on a bit of a rant this morning, the inside story of the shooting and why the mainstream media will not report that the shooter is trans. So that's worth a watch. Chris Oldcorn, our columnist, takes a look at it. These transgender shootings, whether you want to admit it or not, they're getting more and more often. It was our Jared Yager, our Vancouver reporter, who was the first one to be able to identify the shooter last night. Obviously, as with anything, these type of incidents, Corey, you get a lot of, shall we say, fake news out there. This morning, condolences came in from around the world. King Charles, Prince William, Princess Kate, the leaders of Germany, France, you name it, India, pouring in their condolences. The party leaders, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, due to give statements right now in the House of Commons. A question period has been canceled for the day for these statements, and Carney has ordered flags to fly at half-mast on all government buildings. So other than Tumbler Ridge, we've got a Bonnyville minor league baseball coach charged with a litany of child sex abuse, child porn, bestiality stuff, you name it. He's being charged with it. And the government incompetence story of the day, Corey, Public Health Agency of Canada has had to admit $20 million worth of specialty drugs was spoiled because someone left the door open on the refrigerator. So there you go, 20 million of our taxpayer-funded money out the door because somebody forgot to close the door.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that department still managed to get bonuses for their performance this year. Whereas in the real world, you get fired for that sort of thing.
Yes, in the real world you do. So the RCMP, who last night described the shooter as a gun person, a phrase I've never heard used before, they're set to hold a press conference at any moment now. So we'll keep checking back with the Western Standard.news, and we'll have all the updates as they come in.
All right. Thanks for the updates, Dave. Dark as they may be, and I'll see you in person for the next show.
Yeah, safe travels back.
All right. Thanks, Dave. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. And yeah, the Standard has been putting those stories up as this horrible tragedy has been unfolding. The reason that newsroom has got the people out there, and Jared working so hard out in the West, and Chris Oldcorn out in the East of us. So we got to remind you guys, it's because you've subscribed. So thank you if you've subscribed already. And if you haven't, get on there, westernstandard.news/subscription, because we will provide real unvarnished news, guys. We won't go into that woke bizarreness that the RCMP and other news outlets will do. As Dave mentioned, this was one of the things with things as they were unfolding with the Tumbler Ridge mass shooting, the horrible school shooting there. But they reported as a gun person in a dress. Like, they're so terrified of the woke, so terrified of this weird trans fixation the world's had for the last few years, that they just can't say a man in a dress, because that's what it was. A young man in a dress murdering people. That's what it was. And it doesn't, if we'd be more honest, it would defuse perhaps some of the hate and conspiracy theories that can come out of something like this. Look, not every trans person is violent, not by a long shot. But if you try to hide when this happens, or try to hide from the trend, that Derek Fildebrand did talk about that there is a higher number of trans people participating in these kinds of shootings than others. It's still a minority of a minority, literally. So the vast majority of trans people aren't going to hurt anybody. But the consequences when somebody flips their lid, goes off, and decides that for whatever reason they got to take a gun and start slaughtering people, particularly in this school, we got to study what's underneath that. Now, we can take a few days to start digesting and studying that. We got a community that's just been traumatized. It's horrible to think. I worked a lot up in Tumbler Ridge. For people unfamiliar with it, it's in northern BC. It's a town that was based on coal mines that kind of opened and closed. It's an interesting town when you drive around it. You can tell it's a company town, a real planned central downtown. It's not terribly old. There was a big gas exploration boom up there. So I worked up there quite a bit for a few years back when I was a surveyor. Lots of grizzly bears too. But it's a small, tight, isolated community. So you just know, I mean, with 20, what is it, 27 people still injured and recovering, hopefully, and that 12-year-old girl who's fighting for her life, let's really hope she makes it. Plus, 9 others murdered, and then 1 who killed himself. Everybody will know somebody who's been impacted by this up there. It's just unimaginable what's going to be going on, the grief, and then responding to it. I mean, there's no quick way to respond to something like this in general. I mean, nobody expects it. Nobody sees it coming. But at least in a city, you have a lot of resources. You have big hospitals. You have helicopters. You have a plethora of police officers, tactical teams. Tumbler Ridge has an RCMP detachment and I think a little health unit. The victims of this would have had to have been, I guess, evacuated to Grand Prairie, might be one of the closest larger places, or Dawson City. Dawson Creek. But it just made it worse. Perhaps there could have been more survivors if the resources had been there. You can't plan for everything, particularly something like this. But let's evaluate this as we start to try and wonder what the heck happened, how it happened, carefully, and not be afraid to start digging in to find out the roots of some of this. I don't think we'll ever be able to prevent every sick lunatic from going out on murderous rampages. Unfortunately, a screw goes loose in some people and they do the worst things. But if we're afraid to dig into some of the underlying factors, or we want to pretend that the trans aspect has nothing to do with it, then we aren't truly trying to seek a solution, are we? We're just following a politically correct move. This transgender thing's been a fad. I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. There's real trans people. There always have been. There's people who really want to live out their life as a different gender than what they were born. But let's face it, there's a whole heck of a lot who've just embraced it because it's the thing to do lately. And then they'll just embrace something else later. But when somebody's willing to embrace something like that, that's an indication of some dissatisfaction with life that's not typical. All right, let's get on to independence talk, and I'll talk a little more about what's going on in Tumbler Ridge. We got William Barclay. I've been looking forward to this. He's great to talk to. He's been on before. It's been a while. And he wrote a great column on the Alberta independence movement and, some of the underlying roots and what's going on with that and what's inspiring it. So let's bring William in and discuss that a little. Hey, good to see you, Will. How you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back with you in studio, I guess, eh?
Well, kind of. I'm in the desert, but it all runs through the studio. John's working really hard to coordinate us and pull us together there, and the conversation's what's important rather than the setting. But it's a nice backdrop, isn't it?
I was gonna say, looks like you're having fun at least.
Yeah, yes, a little break from the weather, and you're looking nice and bookish as anticipated. Uh,
Thank you. I appreciate. I got a little bit of a new setup. You know, managed to migrate into a new room, so that's nice.
right on. So what kind of interests me? I mean, independence has been a sort of a subject I've been pretty immersed in for quite a while. But you offer, I mean, a well-educated political view, and what you offered is from a person looking outside in. You're in the East, but you've obviously been looking at it closely. Maybe just kind of start with offering a nutshell what your column was about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. What we've all seen is that the Alberta independence movement is being condemned by various pundits and political actors like the Premier of BC, David Eby, as treasonous and little more than a byproduct of Alberta's lust for oil and its archaic conservative values in politics. However, the recent surge in popularity that secession has enjoyed throughout Canada and in Alberta was not a consequence of simple politics or treason. Rather, the modern advent and onset of the Alberta independence movement is very much Canada's right-wing response to the past decade of liberal oppression and a result of the fact that not just in Alberta, but everywhere across Canada, all right-wing ideology and politics have been openly persecuted, and conservatives have already overwhelmingly been forced to seek out alternative means of political expression outside of mainstream society in order to achieve any political agency and at all affect their future. In a way, you could say that Albertans don't now seek to leave Canada at all, and in fact, they were abandoned by the Canadian nation long ago.
So some of you went into a lot more that I don't as much, which is fine, but so more into it being a right versus left sort of thing. We've had a progressive dominated government in Ottawa with a conservative dominated ideology, I guess you could say, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But do you feel that, I mean, there might not be a little more underpinning the movement than just political ideology? That's definitely the larger part. I mean, I go to these meetings, 90% of the people at the meeting, if you're going to tell where they are on the ideological spectrum, they're conservative. But, is there perhaps something a little deeper as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you could say that broadly speaking, the Canadian state, the Canadian nation is collapsing all around us, and Albertans don't want to participate in it anymore. I mean, like the Canadian state actually displays the two quintessential hallmarks of any failing or failed state. It's unable to secure its borders or maintain sovereign control over them, and it's lost a monopoly over the use of force inside its society. Right. So these are the two quintessential hallmarks of a failed state or a failing state we'd see over overseas, let's say, and we see them at home in Canada. And I think maybe broadly speaking, even more so, you could say that Trudeau Sr. was almost the father of Alberta independence. We could call it all maybe a tale of two Trudeaus, but we can get into that a little bit more later. I think that very much Albertans don't want to participate in the continued failing and failure of the Canadian nation when the Albertan province simply could be doing so well and has been asked to almost prop up this failure, and Albertans have it extracted from their own backs and from their own flesh.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Like, it's the state itself is sort of, I mean, my feelings is that it's fundamentally flawed in the Constitution, and it's just a matter of time as the cracks start to show, and that's what this is. It's indicative of Saskatchewan, Alberta, even BC a little bit. Quebec is starting to liven up again. Whether a person, is on the right or the left, they should start understanding that there's something to be addressed, or this country could be split up. And I'm just wondering if maybe progressives will finally start to sit up and take notice, like, we got to do something about this, or this country could be splitting apart.
Oh, absolutely. I think its food bank usage in Canada is up 100%, with 1/3 of all the people who are using the food banks being children, and 25% of all Canadians are currently suffering from food insecurity. It simply shouldn't be that way in a developed nation, so to speak, as Canada. I think the OECD itself actually confirmed that we're going to boast the single worst performing economy of all 38 OECD members until 2060. And I mean, like we were saying, it simply shouldn't be that way in Canada. For a long time, we're a prosperous nation that could sit beside the US at the table. Right now, we don't even have a seat.
No, it's that's another factor that's kind of come into it, is this the instability in general. I mean, people are kind of feeling insecure. They don't feel there's a good response as an independent state of Canada when basically we're being pushed around pretty heavily by our southern neighbor, and our federal leadership hasn't been able to contain that or control that. So I think maybe it makes people start to lose faith in the federation itself.
Absolutely. I think you could say that Danielle Smith is probably the politician who has the most influence over in America, maybe any influence at all anymore, right? And I think she said it herself very recently, kind of no matter how the Eastern media seeks to twist it, Albertans don't really want anything outside of really standing as equal partners in Canada, not being treated as second-class citizens. There have been a ton of articles recently that talk about how anybody who has a conservative ideology is in favor of separatism is, to put it lightly, an idiot. And I think that, in a way, is this underlying problem in Canada. It's not that, let's say, conservatism is a competing ethos or ideology. It's something that's become necessary to eradicate and a threat to all democracy, according to progressives.
So kind of turning that, farther back to what you mentioned earlier, that I like how you put it, the tale of two Trudeaus. I mean, Canada's two largest eruptions of independence movements historically have been back when Pierre was in, both in Alberta and Quebec. There were serious issues going on. And Justin Trudeau is ridden off into the sunset with a pop star, but it was 10 years of his leadership that really has exacerbated the independence movement to where it is. And something both did was really try to change the social structure of the country. They really went after the identity, particularly Justin, I think later, where your land acknowledgements and constant pandering to others, saying we should look at our shoes, we should be ashamed of ourselves as a country, and there shouldn't be pride, and we're a post-national state. And then, of course, he takes off when the consequences of 10 years of that sort of attitude come about, which is a country that no longer feels united.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the overwhelming majority of Canadians would be unable to even say what it is to be Canadian outside of not American, and that's a problem. I think with regards to Trudeau Jr., what you saw really was this modern advent of identity politics where identities rather than actions became right and wrong. And you could say that that really has led to a plethora of really the outbreaks, the downgradings, the collapse of Canadian society that we've seen. Even let's say what happened in Tumblr recently. It reeks to me of someone who had become hopeless, thought perhaps the last way to, let's say, change their lot in life was to change their identity because that's what they were fed for their entire life. I think ostensibly even by their parents. And when they did that, they did change their identity and they still felt the same way. They had nothing left but to do than to really abort themselves and everybody else. And I do very much think it is an inevitable result and product of these hyper left-wing politics that are being forced and imposed upon Canadian society.
Well, that's it. I mean, personal pride. You can't do well for yourself if you're told your whole life you should be ashamed of something or actions that were outside of your control. But I mean, getting back to the independence aspect of it. So with this mess which has been created by the past two Trudeaus, by a number of events, where do you think, because I want to ask you from somebody outside of Alberta, Mark Carney's going to be the prime minister for some time, presumably. This is something he has to deal with somehow. How and what should a prime minister try to do to quell discontent in Alberta and or Quebec?
I think, to be honest, it's too far gone to kind of quell it, let's say. I think that in a way he has to sit back at this point and let the river see its course. I think that it's a little bit too much for Mark Carney to undo a decade of liberal oppression, like I was saying, in just such a short amount of time. And I don't really think he's really the man to do it. I don't think in a way he has any great desire to do it, outside of perhaps the economic ramifications. I think that, in fact, perhaps Canada's own relationship with America is going to deteriorate on the back of it as well. Because, I mean, Carney himself has antagonized Trump. The Liberals have antagonized Trump. I mean, they misappropriated Gordie Howe's phrase, elbows up, in order to do it. I think with Alberta leaving, the U.S. itself doesn't really have any great impetus to continue the relationship that it even currently has with Canada.
Yeah, so I'll give a little credit to Carney, and I don't give much to Liberals often. I haven't seen him go out of his way to inflame Alberta, at least. He hasn't done anything to fix anything. And as you said, maybe there's nothing he can do. But at least he hasn't been provocative. He hasn't been insulting, as we've seen out of Trudeau or even Chrétien a bit in the past. And we're certainly seeing out of Doug Ford and David Eby. Some people, I would put out to others, if they don't understand, if you aren't in Alberta or when you've got a domestic issue going on, you're only going to get more angry when somebody from outside wags their finger at you and calls you names and does things. Maybe as a role of leadership, there's not much Carney could do, but maybe he could pull Eby and Ford aside and say, "Hey guys, you aren't helping things right now."
You'd hope so, right? I think that a lot of data has confirmed exactly what we're talking about, and it's in a way unavoidable. I mean, the democracy index itself has confirmed that tensions between the liberal federal government and the conservative provinces are now one of the biggest risks to Canada's political stability overall. So you really would hope that you take these people aside and say, hey, maybe don't make it worse, right?
You would hope. And being out east, I mean, what are some of the attitudes you're hearing out there? Like from the time I've spent out there, which admittedly hasn't been a whole lot, though I've gone occasionally. Wasn't so much that there's anybody in the east has a beef with the west. But most often they just don't even really think about the west. It's an indifference, if anything. But it's certainly the independence movement is making a lot of national news now and spurring a lot of national discussion. How do you feel that people on the ground out in Ontario, Quebec are reacting to this, or are they starting to think about it more?
Well, so funny enough, in Quebec, especially amongst the youth, and this is kind of where I definitely differentiate between different demographics, right? But in Quebec, the youth overwhelmingly actually support separatism. Let's say, and they're leaning towards it, something they want to pursue over in Quebec themselves, right? And so I think that in the media, what you're going to be hearing out east and almost everywhere is that there's no support for the independence movement. They think that Albertans are treasonous, etc. They're foolish and all these things. But I think that in reality, it's not just the relationship between Alberta and the federal government that's deteriorated over the past 10 years. The relationship between countless provinces, so many provinces, deteriorated over the past 10 years. And so there are huge sectors of each province that do understand exactly where Alberta is coming from. I think particularly amongst Canada's youth and amongst conservatives, I think it goes without saying. But I think that these people who have had their future robbed and almost eradicated out from under them, again, Canada's youth, understand exactly where Alberta is coming from. I think it was at the outset of the last election, actually, almost half of Canada's youth were in favor of annexation by the U.S., of becoming some kind of territory of the U.S., because they saw no future here. And I think that's concerning. Essentially, half of Canada's future saw no future in Canada. And it's something that I think the Liberal government is going to have to contend with, regardless of what happens in Alberta.
Well, most definitely. And that's a change from the independence movement I knew from 20 years ago when I was involved with it. It was particularly the older generation that was behind it. And there's still a strong segment of older people active and involved. But when we look at the polls and we drill down in Alberta as well, it's younger people driving this. And that's something I think, I'm trying to play some devil's advocate for the guys who, those who oppose the independence movement, they should be cognizant of. Find out what's got them discontent and address that then. As you said, they aren't seeing a good future. They aren't seeing a hope. They aren't seeing an ability to buy a home or get a good career. And if that doesn't change, they're going to pursue more radical means of change, and independence offers them that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's part of this broader thing that we're seeing right now that conservatives have to be a little bit cautious of, and kind of seeding this discourse, where we hear in a lot of ways, especially here in Canada, that conservatism is dying out. There's very little support for it. Religious ideology along with it. All conservative religious ideology is being eradicated. It's simply not true, right? And I think that in a lot of ways, conservatives here in Canada need to be careful to not, let the tail wag the dog, so to speak, and to kind of seed this discourse and capitulate to it. Because especially if you speak to younger people in Canada, there's this huge desire for structure. And it is something that conservative ideology and conservative values do offer very uniquely to young people, right? It's something that liberal ideology, leftist ideology nowadays actually abhors. And so it's something that I do think that we as conservatives need to lean into, is that we do offer a structure and a future and some kind of good that is this light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that by leaning into that as conservatives here in Canada, that's how we start to be able to really speak to the youth again. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's what Alberta's secession, its independence movement really offers, a future.
Well, it's certainly a lot of food for thought for hopefully a lot of people thinking about it. A lot of what I'm getting at is as well, Alberta's discontent's been there for a long time, but now the nation's sitting up and paying attention. Whether or not they're productively going to react to it, we'll see. I guess that'll be the fodder for the next time I have you on to discuss things. I mean, this year is going to unfold with this subject being on top, obviously, for months and months as a referendum approaches. And I look forward to your views on it and others as we work on this, because, I mean, it's a fascinating time to be alive, if nothing else, as a political weenie as we are. So before I let you go, where are people going to find your work? I mean, we know you write columns within the Western Standard, but you're prolific on social media and elsewhere. Where can people get your stuff, William?
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess if you want to stay up to date on my work and say hi, reach out about working together, anything at all, you guys can follow me on Twitter. My handle is at Will Barclay PCBG. I guess that's Twitter or X nowadays, but the handle is at Will Barclay PCBG. Like you said, I'm also a national columnist with the Western Standard, and I've actually just debuted a column in the American Spectator. So yeah, please feel free to check out my work and say hi. I love to meet and chat with everyone.
Right on. Well, thanks for your column there, William, and thanks for your time today. I'm sure we will be talking again soon. There's just so much to cover right now.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Great, thanks. So one more time, folks, yeah, look it up, William Barclay, and you can see his stuff out there, and he's getting columns published in other national publications. Because as you see, a nuanced conversation. We got to watch ourselves. We can be at risk of an echo chamber. I'm an Alberta guy. I can certainly speak to a lot of things within the independence movement in Alberta, but I want to see how people in the other parts of the country are thinking about it. I know there's a lot of people saying, I'm tired of listening to people in the other parts of the country. I understand that. But in the broader scheme of things, getting a little more perspective from there, as you can see, Will is very reasoned and looking at things, from a reasonable perspective. I think it kind of helps both sides in a sense. My side is, of course, on the independence leaning thing. Let's see what else is going on out there in the world before I get on to Tumbler Ridge a little more. The Olympics are happening. I don't know. Some people love watching it. I used to, but look how it's evolved. It's showing my age, I guess. But 30 years ago, when the Olympics were on, whether it was summer or winter, everybody set aside all their time to watch it. You had, of course, your limited channels on television. That's where you were going to watch it. Maybe you were watching at bizarre times because of the time changes, depending on where the events were being held. But it was a huge affair. I mean, people were just locked onto it for weeks. And I don't think that's quite there anymore. Maybe I'm wrong. You guys can correct me in the comments and so on. But it's just turned into such a showy affair, I guess, and lost the focus on athleticism, I think. I really hope the Canadian athletes do well. I mean, I'm an independent supporter, but I still want to see those athletes do great. I look forward to watching some of it and things. But I mean, look at some of the other. Here's an example of, okay, you get sponsorship, you get fashion. If those who've seen those Lululemon outfits that those poor athletes had to wear, those weird giant cloak jackets and so on, like this is supposed to be athletics, not ugly fashion shows. You embarrassed those guys when they had to walk out there and gals wearing that junk. And it really does make Canada look all the stranger, I mean, that's part of it. That's when the countries all get on the world stage. That's one of the things, I guess, with the Olympics. It's good for smaller countries to stand out if they have an athlete or a number of athletes who can manage to break out of the pack and really grab the attention of the world. But if the attention is on something as stupid as an ugly outfit, it hasn't done Canada any favors. Let's see. Yeah, here's another one. And this is one of the things, getting back to the elbows up, getting to the Carney. You guys have probably heard a bit of that's been going on already. Some weirdness. How do you deal with Trump? He's just a figure all unto his own. You can't predict him. You can't cope with him. You can't deal with him. And these are his lines with the bridge between Ontario and Michigan. This has been going on for years. It's been billions of dollars. It's a huge trade route both ways. And he said, Canada's building a massive bridge between Ontario and Michigan. He said they own both Canada and the United States side, and of course built it with no U.S. content. Well, that's because Canada spent all the money to build it. If you wanted to kick in on half, I guess something could have been arranged. The bottom line is, it was built. He says President Barack Hussein Obama stupidly gave them a waiver so they could get around the Buy American Act. He says, I will not allow the bridge to open with the United States until it's fully compensated for everything we've given them. I mean, blah, 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 blah. Like, guys, I know I got a lot of Trump fans on my feed. Good on you. That's fine. But it's ridiculous. It's tiresome. The trade on that bridge and other areas and pipelines and so on benefits both the United States and Canada massively. I understand push and pull. I understand negotiation. But nobody's winning out of this crap. Nobody's winning out of the tariffs. We got to get out of this somehow. I don't know how or when. And this is one of the areas, again, where I give Carney a little bit of a pass, just because who on earth can deal with Trump? You don't know day to day, week to week what he's going to do. But we're talking about a bridge that has billions and billions and billions of traffic going both ways on it, of commercial traffic. And if it suddenly gets thrown in the air, everybody can get screwed. Layoffs can happen on both sides of the border. And over what? What, because it got approved under Obama and he's still petty about it? I don't know. Ugh, but we got a lot to work on. Here's another beauty. Here's one of the areas where you have a difficulty getting pride going in Canada. This was in the Toronto Sun. To give credit. Non-citizen is the term they're using. In other words, an immigrant. In Brampton, which has got no shortage of non-citizens, it's a serial rapist. Serial. Like many, 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 many rapes of children. 13-year-old, as a matter of fact, he impregnated her. And kept getting bail repeatedly and thrown back in. And getting bail and thrown back in. Why the hell is he still in the country? What does it take? If Canada can't deport a serial child rapist, who can we deport? It's bad enough we got a number of the people from, let's say it, low trust societies who are taking advantage of food banks and subsidized housing and a whole number of things, because if they see items, they grab. It's different. It's cultural differences between some people, and those change. But we got to get realistic with some things. But to the point where we can't even get rid of a child rapist, how is the country supposed to feel proud? How are we supposed to see a good future in the country when this nation is so broken that it can't control who lives there and who doesn't, to the point of one of the most odious characters you could possibly have within your borders? I want no part of a country that will do that. I don't want to be a country that's a haven for child rapists. A country that stares at its shoes, has tied itself in progressive knots over its crappy justice system with so many steps and levels to try and deport somebody when this is such a cut and dry case. Get him the hell out of there. And Canada can't do it. Raping 13-year-olds. And it's just one, right? How many of those cases do we keep seeing? Repeat offenders, and judges actually giving them reduced sentences. And they're usually rapists. That seems to be their crime of choice, by the way, guys. Reduced sentences so that they don't have to face deportation. Screw that. Screw that. You know what? If you came to Canada and you have anything more than a parking ticket, you should get the hell out. You can't behave yourself that long. You can't be a safe, productive citizen that long. Get out. We don't need you. There's a whole world of people who understand that if you're going to a new home, you treat it with respect. You follow the laws there. We don't do that. We've got our cultural mosaic to think of. We got our post-national state. Thank you, Justin Trudeau, that you came up with. And now we've seen the final consequence to the point of child rapists still within our country that we can't get rid of. Getting on to direct democracy and independence in Alberta. See, there's a citizens initiative petition. This is one of the great things that the left jumped on all sorts of, because, Premier Smith brought in direct democracy measures, or at least she fixed the ones that Jason Kenney put in, which were crap. And it's allowed, though. They jumped on and said, well, we're going to use it all over the place and fight back against Smith with it. So they started one to ban public funding to Alberta's private schools. Yes, this was it. Because most of these things you see were union spawned. Let's not beat around that bush. They were union spawned. They denied they were union spawned. It was teachers having a temper tantrum. You got to think of where the unions went. The unions used to be labor unions, lunchbox carrying workers who needed better conditions. Now they're civil servants and teachers. Those are the powerful ones. The blue-haired teachers locked in progressivism who've never lived in the world of reality, probably took on teaching because their liberal arts degree wasn't getting them any work aside from being a barista, and now they're embittered and sucking in hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yes, it's in Alberta. They're making well over $100,000 a year and turning down 12% raises, and then upset when that was imposed upon them when they held Alberta's children hostage. So they decided to use the direct democracy system to get back at Daniel Smith. And their petition fell short, fully short. They basically didn't even get half of the signatures they needed, or maybe a little more than half of what they needed, and it died. Meanwhile, the independence petition is roaring out of the gates. The other thing they did was started recall petitions against over 20-some MLAs sitting in the legislature and legacy media. Oh boy, Danielle's in trouble. They're falling like matchsticks. Not even close. The one against Angela Pitt, I think, came in at 16% of what they needed. So I just want to celebrate that loss. Direct democracy is working because enough Albertans, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Albertans, want an independence referendum. But there's not that many who want to ban funding to private schools Because actually, when you look at the funding per student, the private schools save the system money. The beef isn't equity, as they always like to put it. Their beef is that these schools are non-union. Their beef is that teachers are paid on merit at some of these private schools. In fact, some of them are probably making more than those already very well compensated teachers in public schools. Oh, well, too bad, because they pay by the individual, not the others. So, guys, if that appetite was there, I guess you would have gotten your petition through, wouldn't you? But you didn't. You didn't. All right, so we're going to talk a lot more about the shooting in Tumbler Ridge. That's definitely going to be the subject for a while. I guess we got to watch the knee-jerk reactions, and it's going to happen on left and right. There's going to be people vilifying the whole trans community way too much over this, because it wasn't the whole trans community who did it. It was one sick young man who identified as trans. Bear that in mind when you're getting upset with it. Think about, it's not the entire firearm community who did this either, and the left is going to say that. They're going to try and use this as an excuse to ban firearms from law-abiding citizens. They do every time there's a shooting. They're going to say that your hunting rifles should be banned, and your recreational shooting rifles should be banned, and your other firearms should be taken away, stolen by the government. So before you try to label everybody in the trans community because of this, just kind of keep that in mind, that it's just as unfair as labeling everybody in the firearm community. But there's discussions to be had. A person identifying as trans most often is a kid who's acting out, a kid who's lost hope. William kind of touched upon that a little. There's a different discussion about that. Troubled kids, they've always grabbed onto something generation after generation. We've known that. You see any more goth kids anymore? Punk, with punk kids with, safety pins through their ears and mohawk haircuts. You see them occasionally, I guess. People trying to play retro. Emo kids, greasers from the 50s. Look, young people embrace things if they were troubled, to try and draw attention to themselves, whatever their beefs may be, trouble at home, mental health issues, all sorts of things, lots of things. And they came and went with different trends. The thing was always the same. It was a troubled kid. But if a kid's that troubled with mental health issues, unfortunately, it can manifest in the worst possible way later on down the road, which is what happened in Tumbler Ridge, and it would happen with some of those other trans shooters. And there's been a number of them in the States now. It's not a matter of the trans aspect. It's a matter that the trans should be a flag with some of them to make it realize this kid has got something going on and there's some problems to be addressed. That's why there's so many more trans kids now than there had been 20 years ago, because most of them aren't really trans. They're just kids who want to get attention. Yeah, you can all get upset with me as much as you like. There are real trans people. People have turned their whole lives around to try and live as a different gender. And if they're adults, I hope it works for you. Great. Go ahead with it. But all of this non-binary bull crap and the ones in school and the bulk of them and all that, those are just kids riding a trend and finding another way to seek attention and act out. So just as you saw the kid dressed all in black, goth and everything else and hanging out with all the rest depressed kids 20 years ago, didn't mean that kid was going to get violent or necessarily harm people. I think the Columbine kids were goth or something too. It could be wrong. But it's a flag that the kid's is experiencing something and not doing well with it. Right now it's trans. So should we ban every trans kid? Of course not. But pay a little closer attention to it. And it's already starting to fade anyways. We've seen some of those numbers coming. The kid, that's kids, right? Well, that was so 5 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. It's a factor in the shooting that happened in Tumbler, but it's not the only factor. We should ask questions on why this kid had access to the firearms they did. We don't even know what firearms were used yet. What other precursors were there? What happened? What drove this? Trans is just one part of it. We can't pretend it's not a part and say nothing about it. But let's not get too obsessed about that in itself as well. This is something bigger than that. And terrible. And again, I can't imagine. You just send your kid to school and they get slaughtered. It's awful. So for those who are into prayer, by all means pray for those survivors and I hope they can come through this. And let's just hope we see less and less of this. We do have to discuss it. We have to dissect it. These things aren't 100% preventable, but there's got to be some things we can do to reduce having to see any more of this. Nobody wants to see this. All right, that's it for today. We're going to break that down a little more with the pipeline tonight, by the way, where Nigel, Derek, Dave, and I will break down some more issues and things that are going on. And I'll be back in studio in Alberta next week. So thank you for tuning into the Last of My Desert series today, guys, and I will catch you all on the next one.